I want to talk this morning about how the private sector can deal with the loss of trust that has been engendered by the last 2 years. And this is drawn from a policy paper that was published by the Committee for Economic Development. It is a long paper, and I hope that you will find it on the Committee for Economic Development's website. This is going to be a very brief summary of the essentials in that paper, and I hope to leave time for questions from the audience here or around the world. The fundamental point that I want to make to start with, the premise, is that business making was the cause of the Great Recession. Basically, the mistakes are well known in the financial sector, over leverage, liquidity, complex and poorly understood products, etc. And we also, of course, had tremendous failures in the auto side and the industrial side. And so this was all about, in my judgment, fundamental decision making about the allocation of capital, about the spread of risk. There are other causes, to be sure, the regulators, the Congress, the ratings agency, the consumers, what have you. But in my judgment, we have to be honest with ourselves and say that the primary cause, and there were many secondary, the primary cause was business decision making, and that has driven the trust in business to all-time lows, without a doubt. There are two approaches to the restoration of trust. One is public regulation limiting private decisions, and there are two types of regulation now being discussed. One is assuring the safety and soundness in a particular sector, the financial services sector, and that's on the front pages today. A second is basically mandating through law certain governance dimensions in publicly held companies beyond, or in addition to, beyond the financial sector. Mandated compensation and risk processes, enhanced shareholder role, etc. What I want to focus on is the other side. Let's assume that there's going to be some kind of regulation. There is still a tremendous duty and responsibility for companies to do 6 essential things, I believe, to restore trust. So the presentation today is basically on these 6 essential tasks with a brief discussion about some obstacles and then what I think is the underlying issue in all the governance debates which have been going on for the last decade: who holds corporations accountable? Task number 1, and probably the most important thing, is that we need to redefine the mission of the corporation and the role of the board and the CEO. Obviously, we have to attain high performance, sustained growth through outstanding goods and services that benefit all stakeholders, but we need to combine that with sound economic risk management, financial, commercial, and operational disciplines. We then need to attain high integrity, law, ethics, and values in order to have affirmative benefits in the company, the marketplace, and global society, but also to reduce other kinds of risks: legal, ethical, reputational, public policy, country, and geopolitical risk. So we need to explicitly articulate the mission and role, which is to balance risk-taking, the incredibly important creativity and innovation that's always occurred in our economy, with risk management, the financial and operational disciplines, and then fuse this balanced high performance with high integrity. We need to diminish the short-term maximization of shareholder wealth, which I think we all agree, or many critics, and I certainly am one of them, say has driven an enormous amount of bad behavior. So the most important thing is to redefine the fundamental role of the board, of the corporation, and of the CEO. A second important task is to revamp the leadership development process inside of companies or when they go to business schools for continuing education as mid-level executives. At the moment, we have very specialized training in IT, finance, engineering, manufacturing. We have a narrow training for business managers or P&L leaders, how to make their numbers, but we need to broaden that out and focus on the performance, risk, and integrity dimensions of what it is to be the top leaders in a major corporation. We need also then, following from that, to refocus the process for CEO selection, and which would apply also to other senior executives. It's the most important board function. We all know this. It's been said forever. This has not changed. They must choose the right CEO, but that CEO spec has to be changed. We must articulate a new role. They need to have experience and skills in performance, risk, and integrity, and they need commitment and intensity across these 3 dimensions. Promote from within if possible with the right kind of training, as I've indicated before, but if you're going outside, make sure this spec is what the board is focusing on. A fourth objective is really to reformulate the operational goals that guide the corporation. On performance, I think we need to get away, as I've said, from the standard metrics of net income, EPS, total shareholder return, return on equity. They're important, but they have to be significantly diminished. And we have to focus on other metrics, efficient use of capital, operational excellence, customers, employee motivation, technology, comparison to peers. Let me stop for 1 second. Why don't we talk all the time about shareholders? Why don't we talk about customers? Who buys the products of the company? Why don't we focus much, much more on meaningful customer satisfaction, meaningful products, technology development, the things that really make the company go and that create sustained and durable long-term value for the corporation? I really think that we, certainly in the last maybe 20 years, we've gotten everything out of whack by focusing far too much on the shareholders. The shareholders are only important to the extent that the other constituencies of the company, the employees, the customers, the suppliers, are satisfied and working productively to create great goods and services. That's what business is about. Shareholder wealth is derivative. It should not be primary. And I think that's really important because boards have to have the guts to say no if there's froth in the market and the stock price is rising from their competitors, but the competitors are doing stupid things, as we saw in the financial services area, where, say, take a Chuck Prince. How does he go to his board and say, you know, all my competitors, their stock price is up, their profits are up, but they're doing stupid things? Instead, he said, you know, the music's playing, I'm going to dance till the music stops. Probably the most famous quote to come out of the financial and credit crisis. So that was with respect to operational objectives on the performance side. What about economic risk? Clearly, we need to focus on such subjects as capital adequacy, leverage, liquidity, interest rates, currency risk, counterparty, creditworthiness, products, operations, et cetera, and systemic risk. These are the subjects of the legislation that's being discussed in Washington, but they should be the subjects of the companies themselves. Again, my whole pitch here is this is what companies should do regardless of what happens in Washington. These are essentials. I don't have time to go through this. I would say that we need expertise in the companies on each of these subjects, and we need independence. We have to have a risk function. This was not true in the financial meltdown that basically gets past the operational management. There are lots of stories so far, and I think there will be systematic analyses by business school professors and study groups. But basically, in a lot of these financial services companies, the risk function didn't get past the investment bankers. They went in, they made their pitch. The investment bankers said, well, thank you, Ms. Risk or Mr. Risk, get out of the room. We're going to go ahead anyway. They didn't get to the CEO. They didn't get to the board. It has to be independent. It's got to be expert. It's got to be done. And I think where it reports to the board, whether it's the audit committee or risk committee, is less important than it be at a high level in the company. I would say one other thing. My experience in companies is that there is too often just one proposal that's set forward, and then the CEO or the board has to cross-examine to find out what the real issues are. We need red teams and blue teams on most important decisions. We need a debate on what are the key trade-offs, what are the key issues, and how we resolve them. And so I think that's one of the roles that the risk function can perform. A third kind of objective are integrity objectives. People say, well, everybody just does integrity. No, they don't. I've written a book called High Performance with High Integrity, which is about the systems on how you do this and what it means. I'm not going to go through any detail here, but you can measure it. You can measure the principles that the top leaders espouse. You can talk about the practices they use to implement those principles. You can do studies within the company about how people feel about the culture. Do we cut corners to make the numbers or don't we? What happens to people who do that kind of thing? We can compare ourselves with our peers, and we can basically have annual goals and objectives, which happens in every other dimension of the company. We can do it here. So part of comp needs to be in the integrity area. The fifth, and then I guess one last thing I would say on these operational objectives, companies need to think about having a scorecard for the next year where they talk about not their predictions but their aspirations. What are we trying to do? And they put that out inside the company, but they also put it out publicly. If we want to get away from just stock prices being the measure, then companies have got to step up, take some risks, say what we're going to do in performance, in risk and integrity, and then say at the end of the year, did we do it or did we not do it? And be candid about it. I think people will say to me when I make this proposal, there's a lot of risk in doing that. It's hard for companies to do it. The companies are in the toilet right now in terms of public opinion and public confidence. Take a chance. Say what you're going to do, and then say whether you did it or not. Be candid. I've been in big law, big business, and big government my whole life, and I've never found that candor and honesty has ever hurt me. Indeed, it really helps. I mean, it's a fundamental principle, and I think it can apply here.